What would you do when the most powerful man in town walked into your classroom, laid a gleaming contract on your desk, and smiled as if 15 children's futures were worth nothing more than your signature? The morning of December 15th found Martha Hendricks measuring out flour for the children's noon meal, each cup level as a surveyor's line. Through the schoolhouse window, she watched Caleb Morrison's black carriage cut tracks through fresh snow toward the building. 9:30 by the church bell. Right on time, as always. She set the flour tin aside and smoothed her dark wool skirt. The brass key at her throat felt heavier than usual, weighted with the memory of what lay hidden in her boarding room. Papers that could change everything or destroy it all. The door opened without a knock, bringing cold air and the scent of expensive tobacco. Caleb Morrison filled the frame, his beaver coat shedding snow onto her swept floor. Behind him, his driver remained seated, breath visible in white puffs, Miss Hendricks. He removed his hat, revealing silver hair pomaded to perfection. "I trust you've given my proposal due consideration." Martha lifted the contract from her desk, its legal language dense as winter fog. $500 for my father's claim. The papers signed over to Morrison Enterprises. She looked up. In exchange for keeping the school funded through spring term. Precisely. He produced a gold pen from his vest pocket. "Simply sign where indicated, and your employment continues. The children keep their lessons, you keep your position, everyone benefits." She turned the contract over, revealing blank space on the reverse. From her desk drawer, she withdrew her own pen and a small pot of India ink. "I accept your terms, Mr. Morrison. With additions." His pale eyes narrowed. Additions? Freedom clauses. Her pen moved across the paper in careful script. Article 1. The existing mining rights remain with the Hendricks family in perpetuity. Morrison Enterprises may extract silver, but ownership of the land itself reverts to any Hendricks heir upon payment of $1. That's preposterous. Article 2. She continued writing, her teacher's handwriting clear and precise. Any structures built upon said land become property of the original claimant's family upon reversion. Article 3. Access roads built by Morrison Enterprises remain public thoroughfares, maintained at company expense. Morrison's face had gone red above his white collar. "Miss Hendricks, this isn't how business is conducted. You sign my contract, not rewrite it." She set down her pen and met his stare. Outside, the church bell struck 10 o'clock. "The bank is open, Mr. Morrison. You mentioned time running short." She folded the contract, her additions facing outward. "These are my terms. You may accept them, or find yourself explaining to the school board why 15 children will have no teacher come January." Morrison snatched the paper, scanning her additions with growing agitation. "This is highway robbery. This is negotiation." Martha stood, her hand moving unconsciously to the key at her throat. "I learned contract law from my father's books. Every clause is legally sound." For a long moment, the only sound was wind against the windows and the distant ring of hammer on anvil from the blacksmith's shop. Morrison's driver shifted on his seat, harness leather creaking in the cold. "You have 5 minutes to decide," Martha said. "Then I walked to the telegraph office and wired the territorial superintendent. I'm certain he'd be interested to know how Morrison Enterprises conducts its educational philanthropy." Morrison's jaw worked silently. Finally, he reached for his gold pen. Outside, snow began falling harder, each flake catching the morning light like scattered silver coins. The signed contract lay between them on Martha's desk like a treaty between warring nations. Morrison folded it carefully, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. "You think you're clever, don't you?" He tucked the paper inside his coat. "But cleverness only carries you so far in this territory." Martha replaced the inkpot in her desk drawer, her fingers steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Far enough, it seems." The schoolhouse door banged open, admitting a whirlwind of snow and 7-year-old Jenny Baker, her cheeks scarlet from the cold. "Miss Hendricks." Jenny's breath came in quick puffs. "Mama sent me early. She says there's talk in town about the mine closing. About the school, too." The child's wide eyes moved between Martha and the imposing figure of Morrison. "Are we still having lessons?" "Every day until spring term ends," Martha assured her, though her gaze remained fixed on Morrison's face. Run, hang your coat by the stove and start your arithmetic practice. Morrison waited until Jenny had bustled away before leaning closer to Martha's desk. You've won this round, Miss Hendricks. But winter's long and accidents happen, especially to people who don't understand their place. My place, Martha said quietly, is teaching these children. Nothing more, nothing less. Your place is whatever I say it. Island Morrison straightened, his shadow falling across her lesson plans. Every family in this town depends on my mines for their livelihood. Cross me, and you'll find yourself very alone very quickly. He strode toward the door, then paused. That's a pretty key you wear, Miss Hendricks. Family heirloom? Martha's hand moved instinctively to her throat. A remembrance of my mother. Funny thing about remembrances. Sometimes they're better left buried. Morrison's smile held no warmth. Good day. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Martha alone with the smell of expensive tobacco and the growing certainty that she'd just made a very dangerous enemy. Outside, Morrison's carriage rolled away, wheels crunching through snow that fell now in thick, determined flakes. Jenny looked up from her slateboard. Miss Hendricks? Why did that man make you look scared? Martha smoothed her skirt and moved to the blackboard, chalk in hand. Some men mistake caution for fear, Jenny. Now, let's see how well you remember yesterday's multiplication tables. But as she began writing numbers on the board, Martha's mind wasn't on arithmetic. It was on the small brass key that hung warm against her skin and the papers hidden in her boarding room that Morrison must never, ever see. Papers that proved the Hendricks claim held more than silver. It held the answer to questions Morrison's lawyers had been asking all winter long. Outside, the church bell chimed 11 times, and the snow continued to fall. 3 days later, Martha stood in the doorway of Widow Patterson's boarding house, watching her fellow teachers load their belongings into the morning stage. Sarah Mitchell, who taught the upper grades in the next district over, hefted her carpet bag with practiced ease. You could still come with us, Sarah called. Denver's got positions open. Better pay than here, and no mining company breathing down your neck. Martha touched the brass key at her throat, feeling its familiar weight. Through the window, she could see her schoolhouse, smoke rising steadily from its chimney. Inside, Jenny Baker would be early again, practicing her letters before the other children arrived. Tom Kowalski would bring his younger sister, Anna, her lunch pail packed with the pierogi their grandmother made. The Henderson twins would argue over who got to ring the morning bell. The children need consistency, Martha said finally. Especially now. Sarah shook her head. Children need teachers who are alive to teach them. Morrison's not the kind of man to forgive what you did to him. The stage driver called for final boarding, his breath white in the morning air. Sarah climbed up, settling her skirts around her. You're a good teacher, Martha Hendricks, she called as the stage lurched into motion. Don't let stubbornness make you a dead one. Martha watched until the stage disappeared around the bend toward the territorial road. Then she walked back inside, where Widow Patterson waited with a pot of coffee and knowing eyes. Got a letter for you, the older woman said, sliding an envelope across the kitchen table. Came on yesterday's mail coach. Martha recognized her cousin's handwriting immediately. Eleanor lived in San Francisco now, married to a banker, with 3 children and a house on Nob Hill. The letter was thick, substantial, probably containing photographs and news of the wider world. She opened it carefully, and a train ticket fell onto the table. Dearest Martha, the letter began. Thomas and I have been discussing your situation. We have a position for you here, governess to the Morrison children. Yes, I know the irony, but it's not the same family. Good pay, comfortable accommodations, and most importantly, safety. The ticket is for December 20th. Wire me your answer. Martha stared at the ticket. First-class passage to San Francisco. Worth more than she made in 3 months of teaching. A new life, far from mining companies and bitter winters and the constant weight of being her father's daughter. She folded the letter and placed it beside her coffee cup. Through the window, she could see children beginning to gather outside the schoolhouse, their voices carrying clearly in the cold air. Jenny Baker's early again, Widow Patterson observed. That child worships you, you know. She worships learning, Martha corrected. I just happen to be the one holding the chalk. Same thing, in the end. The widow refilled Martha's cup. Question is, will someone else be holding that chalk come spring? Martha watched Jenny help little Anna Kowalski through the schoolhouse door, the older girl patient and careful with her charge. Tom Kowalski waved his thanks before hurrying toward the mine entrance, lunch bucket in hand. The Henderson twins had arrived and were already debating the bell-ringing privileges. 15 children, 15 futures that would be shaped by whoever taught them next. Martha picked up the train ticket and walked to the kitchen stove. The flames danced behind the iron grate, hungry and warm. You could still change your mind, Widow Patterson said quietly. Yes, Martha agreed. I could. She fed the ticket to the flames, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken. Outside, the school bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times Jenny Baker had won the morning's argument. Martha finished her coffee, pinned her hat in place, and walked out into the snow toward the sound of children's laughter. The blizzard struck on the 18th of December, 2 days before Eleanor's train ticket would have carried Martha away from everything she'd ever known. By afternoon, snow piled against the schoolhouse windows like white walls, and the wind howled across the valley with voices that sounded almost human. Martha kept the children inside during their usual recess, setting them to copying passages from their readers while she fed more wood into the pot-bellied stove. The flames devoured each log hungrily, but the cold seemed to seep through the walls regardless. Miss Hendricks? Tom Kowalski looked up from his slate, where he'd been practicing his penmanship. Papa said the mine's closing early today. Too dangerous to work in this weather. Should Anna and me head home now? Through the window, Martha could barely make out the shape of buildings across the street. The general store had already shuttered its windows, and smoke from chimneys disappeared almost immediately into the driving snow. I think that's wise, Tom. Help your sister with her coat. She moved to the window, peering through gaps in the frost. Henderson twins, your father will be looking for you. Jenny, does your mother know where? The door burst open, bringing a rush of snow and bitter air. Caleb Morrison stood in the entrance, his expensive coat crusted with ice, his face grim beneath his hat brim. Children, he called, his voice carrying unusual authority. You need to come with me now, all of you. Martha stepped between Morrison and her students. Mr. Morrison, the children are safe here. Their parents know. Their parents are trapped. Morrison's pale eyes fixed on her. Flash flood hit the canyon road an hour ago. Creek ice gave way, waters running 8 feet high. No one's getting home tonight. Jenny Baker began to cry, a small sound quickly taken up by Anna Kowalski. The Henderson twins moved closer together, their usual bravado replaced by wide-eyed fear. Where exactly do you propose to take them? Martha demanded. Company boarding house. It's built solid, got enough food for a week. Heat, too. Morrison stamped snow from his boots. Unless you'd rather keep them here, hoping your little stove can fight off a Dakota blizzard all night. As if summoned by his words, the wind gusted harder against the building. The schoolhouse creaked, and Martha felt cold air knife through gaps in the window frames. The stove, which had seemed adequate an hour ago, suddenly looked very small against the vast hunger of the storm. The boarding house is company property, she said carefully. What assurance do I have? My word. Morrison's voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Whatever our differences, Miss Hendricks, I don't make war on children. Through the window, Martha caught sight of a lantern bobbing through the snow, someone fighting their way toward the school. A moment later, Doc Brennan pushed through the door, his medical bag clutched against his chest. Thank God, he gasped. Morrison, your man found me. Is everyone here safe? For now, Morrison replied. But we need to move them before full dark. This storm's got teeth. Doc Brennan nodded, still catching his breath. Creek's running wild, and it's taking the bridge with it. Anyone caught on the wrong side? He shook his head. Company boarding house is our best bet. Built to withstand whatever nature throws at it. Martha looked at her 15 students cold, frightened, depending on her to keep them safe. The brass key at her throat seemed to pulse with warmth, reminding her of promises made and secrets kept. But promises meant nothing if the children froze. Very well, she said. Children, bundle up. We're going to spend the night somewhere warm and safe. As the students gathered their coats and lunch pails, Morrison approached Martha's desk. Wise choice, Miss Hendricks. She was folding her lesson plans when her hand brushed against something that shouldn't have been there, a small envelope tucked beneath her ink blotter. Her heart stopped. Inside that envelope were the papers from her mother's jewelry box. The papers that proved the Hendricks claim held more than silver. Papers that she'd hidden in her desk that morning, planning to take them to the telegraph office after school. Papers that Morrison must not see. Problem? Morrison's voice was silk over steel. Just gathering my materials. Martha's fingers closed around the envelope, slipping it into her coat pocket. The children's education doesn't stop for weather. Morrison's smile held the same warmth as the blizzard outside. How dedicated of you. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive and hungry, and Martha realized that the storm was the least dangerous thing she'd faced tonight. The Morrison Company boarding house squatted against the hillside like a fortress, its thick log walls and narrow windows designed to withstand whatever the territory could throw at them. Inside, oil lamps cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn beams, while 15 children huddled around a massive stone fireplace, their voices a comforting murmur against the storm's rage. Martha moved among them, checking that coats had dried and that everyone had eaten from the company cook's surprisingly generous stew. The brass key at her throat felt like it was burning against her skin, and the envelope in her coat pocket might as well have been made of dynamite. Quite the little mother hen, aren't you? She turned to find Morrison watching her from across the room, a brandy glass in his hand and satisfaction in his pale eyes. The company foreman, a thick-shouldered man named Briggs, stood beside him like a loyal dog. The children are my responsibility, Martha replied. Indeed they are. Morrison took a sip of his brandy. Tell me, Miss Hendricks, what else do you consider your responsibility? The question hung in the air like smoke. Across the room, Jenny Baker looked up from the book she was sharing with Anna Kowalski, her young face creased with worry at the adults' tense voices. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Morrison set down his glass and walked closer, his footsteps deliberate on the wooden floor. Briggs here made an interesting discovery this afternoon. Seems someone's been asking questions about mineral surveys. Old surveys. The kind that might contain inconvenient information. Martha's blood turned to ice water. I wouldn't know about surveys. No? Because according to the Territorial Surveyor's Office, someone matching your description requested access to the original Hendricks claim documentation. Last week. Morrison's smile was predatory. Right around the time you were rewriting my perfectly reasonable contract. Children! Morrison called, his voice carrying false cheer. Time for bed. Mr. Briggs will show you to the sleeping quarters. But Miss Hendricks Jenny started. We'll join you shortly, Morrison finished. We adults need to discuss some boring business matters first. Tom Kowalski stood protectively near his sister, his young jaw set with determination that reminded Martha painfully of his father. We can stay with Miss Hendricks. We don't mind boring stuff. I mind, Briggs growled, stepping forward. His hand rested casually on the gun at his belt. Move along, boy. Martha caught Tom's eye and nodded slightly. Go ahead, children. I'll be there soon. As the students filed reluctantly toward the back rooms, Jenny Baker broke away and ran to Martha, throwing her arms around her teacher's waist. I'm scared, the little girl whispered. Martha knelt and smoothed Jenny's brown hair, forcing her voice to remain steady. Remember what I taught you about multiplication tables? Sometimes the hardest problems have the simplest solutions. You just have to be patient and think them through. Jenny nodded solemnly and rejoined the group. Martha watched until the last child disappeared down the hallway, then turned to face Morrison. Now then, he said, settling into a leather chair beside the fire. Let's discuss what you really know about your father's claim. My father was an honest miner. He filed legal paperwork. Your father was a fool who stumbled onto something that didn't belong to him. Morrison's mask of civility finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Do you know what a geological survey is, Miss Hendricks? Rock formation. Mineral déposé. Very good. And do you know what the original territorial survey found on your father's land? Morrison leaned forward. Firelight dancing across his face. Not silver. Never silver. That was just convenient cover. Martha's hand moved unconsciously to her coat pocket, where the envelope seemed to burn against her fingers. Coal, Morrison continued. The richest vein in the territory, running straight through what your dear father thought was a played-out silver claim. Enough coal to fuel the railroad expansion, power the new mills, heat every home between here and Denver. That's impossible. The silver was planted. Salted samples, just enough to make the claim look legitimate while I arranged to buy it properly. Morrison stood, pacing before the fire like a caged wolf. Your father was supposed to fail, go broke, sell cheap, disappear. Instead, he sent you to teachers' college and left behind a daughter smart enough to read legal documents. Martha felt the world tilt around her. Every assumption she'd held about her father's legacy, about Morrison's interest in the claim, about her own place in this elaborate game, all of it crumbled like a house built on sand. The school funding, she whispered. You needed me desperate enough to sign without reading the fine print. Exactly. A teacher's salary leaves no room for legal representation. I offer you a simple choice. Sell the claim and keep your job, or lose everything. Morrison's laugh was bitter. Except you didn't play your part correctly, did you? You had to add those damned freedom clauses. Martha pulled the envelope from her pocket, her hands surprisingly steady. These are copies of the original territorial survey. The real one, not the version on file at the county office. She opened the envelope carefully. My mother was smarter than either of us gave her credit for. She kept copies of everything. Morrison's face went white. Impossible. Those documents were destroyed. The forgeries were destroyed. Martha unfolded the papers, their official seals catching the firelight. These show coal deposits worth more than all your silver mines combined. They also show mineral rights that extend far beyond my father's claim, into land you've been mining for 2 years. Give me those papers. I don't think so. Martha backed toward the window, her mind racing. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but she could see light in the distance, lanterns moving through the storm. The parents, perhaps, fighting their way through the flood to reach their children. Morrison nodded to Briggs, who stepped between Martha and the door. You're not leaving here with those documents, Miss Hendricks. Too much depends on them staying buried. The children will be perfectly safe, provided you're reasonable. Morrison held out his hand. The papers. Now. Martha looked at the documents in her hands, then at the bedroom door where 15 children waited for her to keep them safe. The papers represented her father's legacy, her family's future, justice for years of Morrison's manipulation. They also represented the children's lives. There's a price, she said quietly. Name it. The children go free. All of them. Tonight. No matter what happens to me. Morrison considered this, his pale eyes calculating. Done. The papers for their safety. Martha nodded and held out the documents. Morrison reached for them eagerly, and Martha stepped back toward the massive stone fireplace. Miss Hendricks Morrison's voice carried warning. You want these papers? Martha held them over the flames. Here are my terms. Legal terms, Mr. Morrison. The kind you understand. The papers caught fire immediately, their edges curling black as Martha held them steady above the flames. Morrison lunged forward, but it was too late. Years of evidence, proof of his crimes, his theft, his manipulation, all of it turned to ash in seconds. You little fool. Morrison's face twisted with rage. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Martha brushed ash from her fingers, her voice deadly calm. I've just made you a very wealthy man, Mr. Morrison. Those papers were the only proof of your illegal mining operations. Without them, your claim to that coal is legitimate. Then why? Because I kept copies. Martha smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was genuine. Hidden where you'll never find them. Insurance, Mr. Morrison. Behave yourself. Honor our contract. Leave these children and their families alone, and those copies stay hidden. Cross me again, and every newspaper between here and Washington will have the full story. The room fell silent except for the crackle of flames and the distant howl of wind. Morrison stared at Martha as if seeing her for the first time, his calculations racing behind pale eyes. You're bluffing. Am I? Martha pulled the brass key from around her neck, holding it up to catch the firelight. This opens a safety deposit box at the Territorial Bank in Cheyenne. Box number 73, registered under my mother's maiden name. The clerk there has instructions to open it if anything happens to me. Morrison's jaw worked silently. Outside, the sound of voices grew closer, parents calling their children's names, lanterns bobbing through the snow like fallen stars. The children, Martha continued, go home tonight. The school stays funded through spring term, as agreed. And you honor every clause of the contract I made you sign, including the freedom clauses. Briggs moved his hand toward his gun, but Morrison raised a warning hand. Stand down. Morrison's voice was hoarse with defeat. Let the children go. 20 minutes later, Martha stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching the last of the parents disappear into the storm with their children. Jenny Baker had hugged her goodbye 3 times. Tom Kowalski had promised to help his sister practice her letters, and the Henderson twins had argued over who got to carry the lantern all the way home. Now the building stood empty and cold, but somehow it felt more alive than it had all winter. Behind her, footsteps crunched through snow. Martha turned to see Doc Brennan approaching, his medical bag in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. Thought you might need this, he said, offering her the cup. Hell of a night. Martha accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her chilled fingers around the warm ceramic. Will the children be all right getting home? Morrison sent his men to guide them. Say what you will about the man. He keeps his word when it suits him. Doc Brennan studied her face in the lamplight. Question is, will you be all right? Martha touched the place where the brass key had hung, now empty. The real key, the one that opened her mother's jewelry box, was still hidden in her boarding room, along with the copies of documents that would keep Morrison honest. The key she'd shown him was nothing more than a brass button from an old dress, filed and shaped to look like something important. Sometimes the hardest problems had the simplest solutions. I'll be fine, Doc. The children will have their school, their families will have their livelihoods, and Mr. Morrison will have his coal mine. Everyone gets what they need. And what do you get, Martha Hendricks? Martha looked through the schoolhouse window at the chairs arranged in neat rows, the blackboard ready for tomorrow's lessons, the pot-bellied stove that would keep 15 children warm through the rest of winter. I get to keep teaching, she said simply. Doc Brennan nodded and headed back into the storm. Martha finished her coffee, banked the fire, and walked out into the snow toward Widow Patterson's boarding house. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, new stories to tell. Behind her, the school bell caught the wind and rang once, soft and clear, like a promise kept in the darkness. Spring came early that year, melting the snow in great rushing torrents that filled the creeks and turned the valley green almost overnight. Martha stood in the schoolhouse doorway on the last day of term, watching her 15 students practice their penmanship in the warm afternoon light. Jenny Baker had mastered long division, Tom Kowalski could recite the Gettysburg Address from memory, and the Henderson twins had learned to settle their arguments with words instead of fists. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Miss Hendricks? Jenny looked up from her slate, where she'd been carefully copying out a poem. Are you coming back next fall? Wouldn't miss it, Martha assured her. This is where I belong. Through the window, she could see Morrison's coal operation in full swing, black smoke rising from the processing plant like incense to industry. The man himself had kept his word, honoring every clause of their modified contract. The freedom clauses she'd added ensured that the land would return to the Hendricks family eventually, but for now, everyone prospered. After the children had gathered their books and headed home for summer vacation, Martha walked to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the real documents, the ones that proved Morrison's theft and established her family's true claim to the richest coal vein in the territory. She touched the papers gently, then closed the drawer. Some bargains were worth keeping. Even dark ones, transformed by freedom clauses and the courage to rewrite the rules. Outside, the church bell chimed 5 o'clock, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang of summer afternoons and promises kept. Martha Hendricks picked up her hat, pinned it carefully in place, and walked out into the golden light of a job well done. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while. I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.